Alright YouTube, so we are here to, of course, talk about some Final Fantasy XVI. The embargo on 16 was lifted yesterday. From what I gather, there was a gaming event sometime around the end of January where a bunch of content creators, influencers, and like gaming journalism sites and stuff like that, they got to actually get their hands on the game, play it for, I believe, what is a 2-hour demo from what I've read. And they were able to talk about it finally yesterday. So that, of course, means there's a ton of information out there, gameplays, reviews, thoughts, opinions, and I figured I'd throw my hat in the ring as well. Now, obviously, your boy's not suckling at the teat of Square Enix, so I didn't get an early hands-on preview of the game. This gameplay is actually pulled from the Dengeki Online YouTube channel. This gameplay was linked to me specifically by somebody, so I figured I'd just use it. So this hands-on preview, or demos, we'll probably just call it going forward, is a special version of the game that was made specifically for the media to play. It has things in it that probably won't be there for the full version of the game. Like, for example, Clive has access to 3 different icons abilities. That probably won't be the case once we actually have the full game, because for one of the abilities that you can use throughout this demo is for Garuda, but you're actually fighting Garuda in this demo, so more than likely you'd get those abilities after this part of the story with the full game, I would think. This demo itself is extremely combat focused. That's the entire point of the demo, and I've said in the past that I want more from 16, from like the expanded world and what else we can do in the game besides fighting, but I'm not going to fault this demo for giving us a lot of combat, because again, that's the entire goddamn point of it. Now, we're not going to sit here and break down all the nuances of combat with this game, because that's better left to the people who actually got to play the game. We'll talk about a little bit of stuff here and there. For one, when it comes to the icons, I believe with this specific demo, each icon had 2 different abilities to use, but there is more to unlock that just wasn't accessible with the demo. I believe that's what Final Fantasy Union said in their video. You can cycle the icons in the middle of combat with left trigger, so you can cycle from Phoenix to Garuda to Titan. Now, during combat, Clive has his own abilities to use, we'll just call them human abilities for the sake of this conversation. But if you hold down right trigger, you can actually access the abilities of whatever icon you currently are using, and each of their abilities have their own cooldown timer. So in theory, during combat, you would be cycling through all of your icons that you're able to use, while one's on cooldown, you switch to the next one, use their abilities, and then so on and so forth, right? This actually isn't too dissimilar to 7 Remake, where you use up a character's ATB gauges, and then you would either issue commands to another character whose ATB gauges are full, or you'd actually switch to them and then issue commands or whatever. It's kind of the same thing here. You're just cycling through icons instead of actual characters. Also, speaking of the icons, each icon has their own limit break, which is pretty cool to see that that is also returning to Final Fantasy XVI. And you build them up differently depending on each icon. Now, Garuda and a Phoenix are more so offensive focused, so you just kind of build up their limit breaks how you'd expect, doing damage. Titan's actually a little bit more of a defensive icon. One of his abilities that you can use is Guard, where if you use it, you block most of the incoming damage, but that's also actually how you build up Titan's limit break, by blocking damage with his Guard ability. So it will be pretty interesting going forward once we get the full game and get the other icons to see what their abilities are, but also their limit breaks and how you build up the limit break gauge. Now, in terms of the combat and the demo itself, you kind of get every level of gameplay you would want from like getting to experience the combat in this game, because you get to fight random like mobs of enemies and shit like that. But there's also a handful of boss fights in the game, and I think there's also kind of like mid-level mini-bosses as well, so you're kind of getting every aspect of the combat. In terms of the actual boss fights in the demo, you get 3 of them. One of them is a human versus human. It's Clive fighting Benedicta, who is, of course, the dominant of Garuda. And then you also get to fight Clive versus Garuda directly, which looks like a pretty goddamn cool fight. And then the third fight is Icon versus Icon, which is Ifrit versus Garuda. Now, the human versus human fight seems to be pretty standard, kind of run-of-the-mill for what you expect of an action RPG, but it's the icon stuff that looks really unique, right? Getting to use Clive and going one-on-one with these gigantic monsters that are like several stories taller than you and shit, it's just fun, man. I've always enjoyed fighting gigantic monsters in video games. Shadow of the Colossus is the perfect example of this. That's why the game has always stuck with me since I was a kid. There's something so rewarding as being a human character and taking down these gigantic monsters. And the Icon versus Icon fights seem to be more of a spectacle than an actual in-depth fight. It's nothing like when you're using Clive versus a human and having to like dodge and parry and block and whatever the fuck, right? Like, you're kind of just beating the shit out of each other. It's described by the devs as like pretty much like a professional wrestling match. And it looks pretty cool. Like, I've seen a cutscene in one of the reviews where Ifrit like slams Garuda into the ground by their head and like drags them across the land and shit. It looks fun as fuck. And each icon battle is supposed to be unique in like what happens in the fight itself, but also like the little cutscenes that happen in the middle of the fight and stuff like that. So it's not just repetitive, like you're not just doing the exact same fight you did previously with a different icon. It's going to be interesting. But also, speaking about combat in general, kind of across the board, there are QTEs in combat. This might only be for like the boss fights potentially, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not the biggest fan of QTEs in combat just because it doesn't feel like you're really doing anything. It's better than a cutscene, I suppose, because you're getting involved, but it's like, you just have a button flash up on screen, you just got to press it, and then shit happens that you're not actually doing yourself. So I'm not the biggest fan of it, but from what I've heard in some of the reviews that I've watched and stuff, it's not the biggest deal. It's not like excessive or anything. And apparently it's handled pretty well in this game. Now, in terms of the game itself, there's actually not a difficulty setting. The game's always going to be kind of as hard as it is. But there are sort of accessibility options. There's these 5 different rings that you can use in the game that will help you in combat if combat is too complicated for you. But if I have my information correct here, you do kind of get to choose a difficulty setting, so to speak, at least what I gathered from Final Fantasy Union's video, where you can choose, I think, at the beginning of the game, whether you want to play story-focused or action-focused. And doing story-focused, you get access to these rings, if I'm not mistaken, and you can choose which ones you want to use and which ones you don't. So let's kind of go over these rings really quickly and what they do exactly. So there's the Ring of Timely Evasion, which allows Clive to evade pretty much all the attacks automatically, so you don't have to actually dodge anything yourself. There's the Ring of Timely Strikes, which lets you combo just by tapping the attack button once instead of actually having to combo yourself manually. There's the Ring of Assistance, which is a ring for the dog Torgal, who can help you with like healing and attacking and things like that. There's the Ring of Timely Healing, which is just an auto potion essentially, so Clive will get down to a certain amount of health and he'll just automatically heal himself instead of you having to manually do that. And lastly, there's the Ring of Timely Focus, which isn't super dissimilar to the Ring of Timely Evasion, except it gives you a bigger window for dodging attacks as opposed to just automatically dodging attacks. So I've seen kind of mixed opinions on this shit, but I absolutely love it. There's nothing wrong with more accessibility features. Not everything needs to be Dark Souls and get killed and die over and over 100 times to defeat one boss fight, right? I think it's nice to have options for people that aren't that good at action RPGs, and that's myself, to be honest. Like, it took me a while to really get the hang of, like, Remake and stuff like Witcher 3, and even right now I'm kind of playing through the Kingdom Hearts games, and I'm not that good at it. I've just never been that good at action RPGs, which is why, you know, I grew up playing fucking turn-based RPGs and shit, so it's still a learning curve for me. But the thing is, you don't have to use these. They're entirely optional. Even if you think they're, like, bullshit or whatever, or a crutch, you're not forced to use them. You can go into the game, completely ignore them, and even if you do want to access these rings, you don't have to use them all. You can just choose whatever you want. Like, personally, I kind of like the idea of the auto potion one, where I can focus on the combat, but I don't have to worry about healing Clive, right? He'll automatically heal himself. Same thing with using the Ring of Assistance with the dog, right? The dog will heal you and fight with you, and you don't have to kind of focus on using those yourself. But also, you have the options of the 2 different rings for evading. Like, if you don't like the idea of just automatically dodging shit, because that's, like, not fun and kind of unrealistic, you can at least use the other ring to give you a bigger window for dodging manually, so that you can kind of get the hang of the combat. So again, this is perfectly fine. I think there's nothing wrong with adding more accessibility features for people that just aren't that good at these kind of games, because some people are just so up their own asses because they play these, like, hardcore action RPGs, and, like, frankly, nobody gives a shit. That said, though, I do hope the game offers a pretty decent level of challenge. Like, I don't want, since there is no actual difficulty setting to make the game harder, I hope that there's at least hard fights in the game, naturally. That you kind of are almost compelled to want to use those rings, but maybe you put it off to see if you can get better at the game before you actually access those. I believe that's kind of everything that's worth talking about from the demo, from, like, a secondhand perspective. There are a couple of things that are worth mentioning, though. There is equipment for Clive. You can equip different swords, sashes, van braces, which I didn't know exactly what that was, but it's kind of like the armor, essentially, and accessories. I don't know if there's more than one accessory slot in the demo, and I don't know if you can get more than one accessory slot in the full game, but I think you might be able to, because Yoshida has talked about in interviews that you can do, like, side quests to get more inventory slots, and I assume inventory slots would be more like accessory slots. When it came to the demo, I believe there was like 14 abilities for Clive, but what's interesting about the abilities in this game is that you can respec them at any time, which is pretty cool, because other games make you kind of jump through loopholes to do that shit. Witcher 3, for example, I mentioned that earlier. You have to, like, drink a certain potion to, like, reset your skill points. So I like that it's just something you can do kind of whenever you want to, right? If you just want to test different builds, but what's more interesting is that you can kind of reset them however you want to, because you can reset abilities one at a time, or you can kind of reset all abilities at once. But what's even more interesting than just that is that you can also lock abilities. So if there's a few abilities that you like to use, or you really enjoy, or maybe you're kind of dependent on, you can actually lock them. And that way, if you reset all abilities, those will stay active, and you actually don't have to go through the effort of reactivating them. Now, kind of branching out from this hands-on preview that these influencers and shit got to play, kind of more information about the game out there that I've found. The most important one that I think most people are going to be interested in is there is going to be a demo for the game that's already been confirmed. We've already talked about that. The demo is going to be roughly about 2 weeks before launch, not specifically 2 weeks, because that would be specifically on June 8th. They're not comfortable giving us a date just yet, but somewhere around 2 weeks before the game, there's going to be a demo, and it's going to be the very beginning of the game. You're probably going to play, I don't know, the first hour or two. I don't know what it's going to be, but data can carry over. So whatever level you end on with, like, the demo and whatever gear you have and all other shit, that's going to carry over to the full game. Like, theoretically, let's say the demo would be the first chapter. You'd essentially be starting the full game in chapter 2 already, which is kind of cool. And obviously, because the demo would be the beginning of the game, this is actually different from this hands-on preview, which, as I said towards the beginning of the video, is roughly about 5 hours into the story of the game. So it's kind of cool. So I was kind of hoping we'd get to actually play this and access this, but it looks like we're not going to be able to. We're just going to be playing the beginning of the game, essentially, with the demo. According to an interview with Famitsu, the game's going to be roughly about 35 hours if you're just doing the story, and about double that if you're trying to do all the extra content, all the side stuff. And for me personally, that's right about the perfect amount, right? Anywhere from like 30 to 40 hours for the story, and somewhere around double that if you're trying to do everything. That's exactly what I want from this game. Also, there's apparently about 11 hours of cutscenes in this game, and that's just from the main story according to Yoshida. And it's not even including like the side quests and shit. And speaking of the side content, there is stuff to do in this game besides the main story, according to Yoshida. Once you meet the character Sid, he's like the leader of an organization. They have a headquarters called the Hideaway. Once you go there, you can start doing side quests that are different from the main story. And you can learn about other characters in the Hideaway and other characters within the world and learn more about the world. But you can also do side quests to like upgrade Clive and shit. There's also a hunt board, which I absolutely love. That's one of my favorite things about like Final Fantasy XII. And it wasn't as good with Final Fantasy 15, but it's still something that I enjoyed doing. There's also apparently going to be some sort of arcade mode where you can earn high scores, but they also mentioned that there's going to be leaderboards, which is kind of exciting because it's something I've actually talked about for Remake Part 2 specifically. And like the Gold Saucer, being able to go into like the Gold Saucer and see like other players' high scores, and you try to beat those high scores, and that might be a similar thing here. And they actually go more into the side content here with Takai's answer, and he actually touches on the global leaderboard stuff in a second, so we'll read over all this real quickly. It says, for example, there's a special mode, a battle mode, in which you are locked to a certain ability of a single icon, and you must clear a bunch of different content in that to earn special items. There's also New Game Plus, which carries over your play data, and you're able to play the game again. And you can do that in story-focused mode or action-focused mode, but for New Game Plus, we also have a third mode that we introduced called the Final Fantasy mode, which not only is more difficult, but also changes enemy placement and enemies that you fight, so it's a completely different experience. It isn't just a harder version, it's a completely different type of experience. So this is actually a very good thing for the hardcore players out there, because there is essentially a hard mode once you beat the game. Very similar to what Remake did, right? You had to play Remake on normal, you unlock hard mode. I wonder if there's any sort of limitations to it in terms of like what Remake did with like not being able to use items and things like that, but it's not just a New Game Plus with harder enemies or whatever the case. Actually, like they said, they have enemies in different places and different scenarios altogether, which is pretty cool. Another thing that's available in the Hideaway, which was mentioned before, is that you can unlock a side game where you can replay stages, but this time to earn score. And we call that our arcade mode. If you play this arcade mode in New Game Plus, you have the ability to upload your scores to the global leaderboard and see how your scores stack up against other players around the world. So all that combined outside of the main story, there's a lot of different content to keep the player engaged beyond just the main story. I personally think that's cool. It's not the biggest deal ever, but I like that they try to incorporate the community into a single-player game, right? Even though you're playing a solo story, you still feel like you're playing with other players too, and you're trying to compare scores and shit. But my dudes, I think that's where we're going to start to wrap the video up. I try to keep the video as informative as I can, but also as short as I can, without going like too in-depth on everything. Try to leave that for the people that actually got to play the game. There's plenty of channels out there. I've already mentioned a few. One of them being Final Fantasy Union, one of my favorite Final Fantasy channels out there. Look, overall, the demo is very combat-focused. The combat looks great. It's to be expected. They have the combat director or whatever from like Devil May Cry 5. Like, you know the combat's going to look good and feel good. Everything else is gearing up to be great. I like the idea of like Clive fighting icons, and the icon battles look good. The side content seems to be good. It's kind of what I want from a game, is side quests where you can kind of learn more about the world and the people and stuff. I don't necessarily need mini games or snowboarding and fishing and stuff like that, which, you know, I'm fine with the side content that seems to be in this game, and I love that there's almost a multiplayer aspect to it. I do wish that we could all play the game a little bit sooner. The fact that we got to wait just a few weeks before launch kind of sucks. I'm hoping the game has a little more exploration than what this demo seemed to offer. Something we didn't actually touch on earlier. I've seen sort of mixed opinions on it, because like IGN's review was saying that there's not a whole lot of exploration in terms of like being able to branch off the path and look for stuff. But Final Fantasy Union's video, they kind of seem like to insinuate that there is the ability to branch off in this particular demo and find like hidden items and stuff like that and lore in the world and shit. So I don't know exactly what to believe, but I hope that it's a little more explorable than what this demo seemed to offer. But ultimately, my dudes, that is going to be my thoughts on what we have so far for this. And there's probably stuff I'm missing out there, but I want to pass off to you guys. There's countless sources out there for anything regarding Final Fantasy 16 right now. From what you've seen and what you've read, what you've watched, what are your thoughts so far when it comes to Final Fantasy 16? That's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Low Gain, or leave it like Cobain.